Hello and welcome to the next edition of the BriefingsDirect Voice of the Customer podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on digital transformation success. Stay with us now to learn how agile businesses are fending off disruption in favor of innovation. Our next thought leadership interview examines how a world-class private cloud proof-of-concept project evolved in the financial sector. We'll now learn about public cloud-like experiences, agility, and cost structures being delivered via a strictly private cloud model. Here to help us explore the potential for cloud benefits when retaining control over the data center is a critical requirement. And we're going to learn about that from Jim McKettrick. He's Senior Account Manager at Applied Computer Solutions in Huntington Beach, California. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Dana. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. So why do certain enterprises require sort of an aggressive adoption of private cloud for security and control reasons, but still want that OpEx public cloud structure? Well, can you have it both ways?
I think we're showing that you can. And I think that people are learning that the public cloud isn't necessarily all it's been hyped up to be, that happens with newer technologies as they come out. But I think you can.
What's probably some of the bigger factors that brings this need for a private cloud? I mentioned security, but I think there's probably other things. What's the driver for keeping it private?
I think security, if somebody actually analyzes it, a lot of times it'll be cost. And data access, ingress, egress. It's more egress. Getting your data back sometimes can be a challenge. I also think there's a little bit of a realization that even though I have all these really harsh SLAs, if something goes wrong, it's not going to save my business if that thing tanks. And do I want to give that away? I have some clients who absolutely will not.
Control, being able to sleep well at night.
Absolutely. I've got other clients that we're going to speak to about here today who have HIPAA requirements, and they are privately held and privately owned, and literally the CEO says, I'm not doing it. Doesn't care what it costs.
Right, and if there was a huge delta between the penalty or price for going public or staying private, but it seems to me that delta, if there is one, is closing, and so you can have the best of both worlds and not pay a very high penalty nowadays.
I think if done properly, certainly from my experience, we've been able to prove that you can run an agile cloud-like infrastructure or private cloud as cost-effectively or more cost-effectively than you can in the public cloud. There are certainly places for both in the market.
And it's going to vary, of course, from company to company and even department to department within a company. But the fact is that choice is there.
No doubt about it. It absolutely is.
Well, tell us, Jim, a little bit about Applied Computer Solutions, your role there, and how you all are defining what you consider the best of a cloud or hybrid cloud environment.
So we are a relatively large reseller, about $600 million. We have specialized in data center practices for 27 years. So we've been in business quite some time and had to evolve, with the IT industry. I would say structurally we're fairly conventional from the standpoint that we are a typical reseller, but we pride ourselves on our technical acumen. We also, because we have some very, very large clients, and we've worked with them to get on their technology boards, and so we feel like we have a head start on what's really coming down the pipe, maybe 1 to 2 years ahead of the general marketplace. So we feel like we have a thought leadership edge there, and we use that as well as very senior engineering leadership in our organization to tell us what we're supposed to be doing.
Well, as I like to say, it's better to show than to tell. So show us through a proof of concept project that you've been involved with. And I know you probably can't mention the company by name, but tell us a little bit about the character of this, because I think it's telling. It's a harbinger of things to come along the lines of what we've been talking in terms of that equation about public or private or both. So tell us a little bit about this proof of concept project.
So I want to correct you on one thing here. It's not a proof of concept. This thing is production live globally. So it started out as a proof of concept. So I've been with ACS for 18 years, and I've had this client for 17. of those years. We've been through multiple data center iterations. Well, this last one that came up, 3 things really happened. Number one, they were under tremendous cost pressure, and as part of that, public cloud was not an opportunity for them. The second thing was that they had grown by acquisition, and so they had dozens of IT, I started to call them IT fiefdoms. And you can imagine culturally and technologically the challenges involved there. Well, we were told, consolidate, globalize. So I was brought in by my client who ran the U.S. for this company, and we had done this in the United States. Different technology, but we had created a single IT infrastructure in the United States, and they said, do it again for the whole world, but save us a bunch of money. And so the gauntlet was kind of thrown down. So the customer was put in the position of having to make some very aggressive choices. And so he effectively asked me, bring me, quote unquote, cool stuff. What's new out there? How can we do this? And some of my, again, senior engineering staff, after I brought this back to them, brought a couple of ideas to the table. And hyper-convergence was central to that. And the ability to simplify the organization, also the IT management for the organization, so that you could give it to anybody in that organization across the globe, and they would be able to manage it working with partners in other parts of the world.
So that remote management being very important for this.
Absolutely. Yes, failover capabilities, disaster recovery within these regional data centers. So we ended up going from, depending on who you spoke to, somewhere from 7 to 19 data centers globally to 3. So we were able to consolidate down to 3. The footprint shrunk massively just in the U.S. data center, one data center. We got rid of the other data center completely. We went from 34 racks to 3.5.
Hyperconvergence being a big part of that.
Correct. Yeah, that was really the key. Hyperconvergence and virtualization. The other key enabling technology was deduplication. So the ability to shrink the data and then be able to move it from place to place without crushing bandwidth requirements, because you were only moving the changes, the change blocks.
So that modern data lifecycle approach.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the backup and recovery approach was built in to the solution itself. So we also deployed a separate data archive, but that's different than backup and recovery. Backup and recovery was essentially handled by VMware, and the ability to have the same machine exist in multiple places at the same time.
Now, there's more than just the physical approach to IT as you've described it. There's the budgetary financial approach. So how do they maybe get the benefit of an OpEx approach that people are fond of with public cloud models and apply that in a private cloud setting?
They didn't really take that approach. I mean, we looked at it. We looked at essentially leasing. We looked a little bit at sort of the pay-as-you-go models, and it didn't work for them for whatever reason. We ended up doing essentially a purchase of the equipment with a depreciation schedule and traditional support. So it wasn't done that way. It was analyzed, and they essentially said, nope, we're just going to buy it.
Okay, so then we get back to the total cost of ownership as perhaps a better metric to look at. Did you have any ability to measure that? What were some of the metrics of success other than this massive consolidation of footprint and control and management?
Certainly, because we had to justify it relative to what a traditional IT refresh, say, would have been. What if we would have done what we had done before globally? And certainly that's what I was working on for the client until this cost pressure came to bear. And it's like, okay, we need to change the way we're thinking about this. And so that's when hyperconvergence came through. So the analysis was somewhat already done, because I was already doing it with refresh compute and storage, traditional SAN storage, things like that, and building out that model. But the model didn't compare. I mean, I think the numbers I had over a 5-year period were we would have spent just hardware and infrastructure costs, not including network and bandwidth, $55 million spend over 5 years, and we did it for 15.
Now, we've mentioned hyper-converged infrastructure several times, but you were using SimpliVity, I believe, and that now being part of HPE. Tell us a little bit about why that was a proof point for you and why you think that's going to be a strength across HPE's portfolio for your organization.
Okay. Well, it certainly, at the time, there were many factors that don't necessarily play into what's happening now, right? I mean, this thing is now built and running, and it's been 2 years. So that's a long time in technology, of course. But the factors involved, of course, again, were the cost savings. HP going forward, the way the client really looked at it, and he is a very forward-thinking technologist, was in his mind, he always liked to say, it's just VMware. So that was the beauty of it from their perspective, is that they could deploy VMware. Everybody in our organization knows how to work with VMware. Mm-hmm. We just deploy that, and they move things around. Everything's managed in that fashion as VMs, as opposed to traditional storage, all the other layers of things that have to be involved in that. It also included built-in WAN optimization, built-in backup and recovery, it can have built-in SSDs, all the other pieces of a hardware stack that you would traditionally have to have from the server on down, and all those pieces fold into a little box, so to speak, physical box, and you get all of that functionality in a much simpler, easier to manage fashion. So it just makes everything easier.
Yeah. So I suppose what I was driving at is the HCI, the hyper-converged infrastructure element of private cloud. When you bring all those elements together, it really creates that solution. So are there any other aspects of HPE's portfolio, in addition now to SimpliVity, that would be of interest for future projects that might mimic this one?
Well, I would say, just staying on this one for a minute, is that there are futures because, HPE is able to take this further. I mean, essentially, you have to remember at the time, SimpliVity was a widget, and they would partner with server vendors, and that was really it, and with VMware. Now that they have a full-fledged, the largest technology company in the world behind them and able to really build out that roadmap, there's all kinds of innovation that's going to come. When you then pair that with things like Azure Stack and Synergy and composable architectures, yes, all that stuff's going to be folded right in there. I mean, it's all, I think I'm going to give HPE credit for having seen what this technology can then bring to them for, and help them springboard forward and then apply it back into things that they're already developing and work with it. So, yeah, I see it. My point was earlier is that I'm going to have more opportunity just in this infrastructure now because of this merger, yes.
So clearly we've covered the bases on the private cloud side, but for those organizations that do want to take advantage of public cloud options, having that hybrid cloud, composable and automated bursting or scale out, combined now with the new stack opportunity to better manage a multi-cloud environment, all really gives us the best of all worlds.
Exactly. There you are. You've got your hybrid cloud right there. And certainly one could do that with traditional IT and still have that capability that HP's been working with. But now, again, you've just consolidated all that down into a very relatively simple hardware hyper-converged infrastructure that you now deploy all those capabilities along with. And you have mobility of your applications and workloads and all that kind of goodness that you can decide where you want to put this stuff.
All right, before we sign off, let's revisit this notion of those organizations that have to have a private cloud. For those that are listening to your story about your client, what words of advice might you give them if they're pursuing such a dramatic re-architecting of their entire IT systems that takes advantage of the private cloud attributes? What might you want to have in place, either people, process, technology, all three, in order to make as successful for them what you've experienced?
Great question. I would say the technology was the easy part. And especially when I learned so much from a global, this is my first global rollout, and I've been in the business well over 20 years. But the difference is when you're messing with people's, moving their cheese and messing with the rice bowl, is is profound. And so it always comes back to people. So the main thing, your words, people and process, were the hardest things to deal with, and quite frankly, still are. To make sure that everybody is on board, they understand what's happening, why it's happening, and to try to get the people on board on your team so that they will actually all pull in the same direction. Otherwise, you end up in a massive morass, and things don't get done, or they become almost unmanageable.
And there's unfortunately plenty of examples of that out there.
Certainly. Again, I've been saying more recently, it always comes back to people.
Well, good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring how a world-class private cloud project evolved in the financial sector, and we've learned how a public cloud-like experience with agility and cost structures that mimic public cloud attributes can be delivered via a strictly private cloud model. This is for those organizations that need to retain control over their data center, and that's a critical requirement. So please join me in thanking our guest. We've been here with Jim McKettrick. He's a Senior Account Manager at Applied Computer Solutions in Huntington Beach, California. Thanks so much, Jim.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And a big thank you to our audience as well for joining us for this BriefingsDirect Voice of the Customer Digital Transformation Success Story. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise-sponsored interviews. Thanks again for listening. Pass this along as you can in your IT community, and do come back next time.